Again, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is the Towne Benefits webinar, Mastering the Basics of the Family Medical Leave Act. And I'm Barbara Jennings, and Corbin Granger is here with me this afternoon. And we hope that you get a lot out of this presentation. If you're a first timer, I'm really glad you decided to join us. And if you are a returning regular, then that's awesome. We certainly hope that, as always, that you learn a lot today. Just to give you a little bit of background, I am a human resources consultant here at Towne Benefits, and I do a lot of work with our group health insurance clients, talking with them, answering questions, helping them navigate sometimes some sticky wickets. And I spent 33 years or so in human resources management, and I feel like I've experienced a lot in that time, and that experience feeds into a lot of these webinars that we do. And so again, I hope that you get a lot today out of this webinar. So I know I've spoken with a lot of you, and hopefully you're going to find this presentation helpful today. So let's get started. First, we have our usual disclaimer. Remember that nobody here is a lawyer, so anything that's presented in here is not legal advice, and you will, throughout this webinar, you'll hear me recommend, okay, this may be a situation where you need to contact a lawyer. So remember, we're not, nor are we tax people, so there may be situations where you do need to consult a professional about any specific need that you have. This is general information. I rely heavily on the Department of Labor's publications. They have a wonderful publication called The Employer's Guide to the FMLA. I strongly recommend it. If you find that, and actually we'll send you a link to it along with the slides. Don't be daunted by the length, okay? That publication is 75 or so pages long, but it is very well laid out, and I would almost say this is kind of my Bible for the FMLA. It answers most questions that people have. So that's where a lot of my information comes from. And we will be getting these slides to you in the near future, hopefully by the end of this week. All right, as we said, this is the basics, and some of this stuff is going to be information that you know, that you've used, and a lot of you put into practice on a pretty daily basis. So we're starting with the who, the what, the when, and the how. And now I also have to warn you, my slides tend to be wordy, okay? I honestly cut and paste a lot of stuff from the DOL, because one of my purposes in doing these webinars is to have you be able to print the slides out and use those as a guide that you can refer back to. And so I do try to include complete information on various topics. So again, we're not going to sit here and read slides, but I do want you to have it available. All right, so first of all, right out of the box, who is an FMLA covered employer? Most of you, again, probably already know this. A private sector employer, if you have 50 or more employees in 20 or more work weeks in the current year or in the previous year, then you are going to be an FMLA covered employer. Now, when I say 50 employees, that means people who are on your payroll. So it doesn't matter if they're full-time, part-time, it's not full-time equivalents, it's your actual head count. And then public agencies, like government agencies, they're automatically covered under FMLA. And then local educational agencies are also covered without regard to the number of employees that they have. Public schools, private schools, elementary, secondary, and that sort of thing are all covered. Now, one word of caution here, we do talk pretty regularly with employers who are kind of on the cusp of being covered by FMLA. So if you're not officially an FMLA employer at this moment, then I would not, when dealing with employees who are requesting leave, I would not present myself or call that leave time FMLA until you're actually required by law to offer FMLA coverage and benefits. And the reason is you don't want to create a situation where people think that you're an FMLA covered employer, okay? So you don't want to give employees the wrong impression. Now, what is an FMLA covered employee? Pretty straightforward. They work for a covered employer. They've worked for that covered employer for at least 12 months as of the date that their FMLA is to start. Those months don't have to be consecutive. Basically, what it's going to come down to is 12 months over the course of 7 years. After that, you don't have to count anything that anyone worked for you more than 7 years ago. That employee has to have worked at least 1,250 hours for the covered employer during the immediate 12-month period before the FMLA leave is to start. Okay, so basically the 1,250 hours in the last 12 months. Then the employee has to work at a location where the employer employs at least 50 employees within 75 miles of the work site. As of the date, the employee gives notice of the need for leave. Now, this is a tricky requirement because that 75 miles and that 50 employees trips people up. But do remember this, the employee's home for FMLA purposes is not the work site, okay? The employee's work site is the office from which the employee receives work assignments. So what that means is if you've got employees that are working remotely, then you gauge where they're getting their orders from as opposed to where they are when they're working remotely. Now, some of this you're going to hear me repeat some of these things as we go along. Just bear with me on that, because sometimes these things bear repeating, and sometimes I'm going to expand on some stuff you heard a few minutes ago. And so I feel the need to repeat some of the information. Now, I had a question recently that somebody asked me, well, what do we do for employees who don't qualify for FMLA yet, but they're asking for leave time? And this gets into a little bit of tricky territory. And what I would probably recommend is that in your handbook and in your official policies for your employees, that you spell out what the FMLA rights are, what the requirements are as far as the time work with the employer and that sort of thing. And then you have a separate policy, which would be called a non-FMLA leave policy. And there you spell out for people, how can, let's say, would you hold the job for 6 weeks for somebody who is not entitled to FMLA? Would you pay them during that time, et cetera? So again, differentiate between your FMLA time and your non-FMLA leave time. All right, so what are the protections of FMLA? Well, you know that it provides job protection for absences of qualified employees under certain circumstances. It ensures the continuation of their health insurance during FMLA, and it requires that the employee be restored to the job they left or to an equivalent job. And it's important to remember that an equivalent job means pretty much identical to the job that they left, that they have to be restored to that job. And one thing I think I need to say is that FMLA is not a moment to, I don't want to say kind of like hold people to the letter of the law. It's not a moment, let's say, to use an FMLA absence to maybe hope that somebody who's not particularly a good employee, maybe they'll quit or something like that. So for example, when you're restoring an employee, you can't disadvantage the employee. So you couldn't tell an employee, okay, when you come back to work, by the way, we've eliminated the job you left from our, let's say, Norfolk office. And so, yes, we're going to bring you back at the same salary, the same seniority, but the job we have open is in Richmond, which means a 100-mile commute. You absolutely do not want to do anything like that to disadvantage an employee. So keep that in mind as you're restoring the employee, that you can't materially basically harm an employee when you bring them back to work. All right, now, when can the employee take FMLA? Well, the usual conditions: the birth of a child, placement of a child for adoption or foster care, to care for the employee's spouse, the child, or a parent who has a serious health condition, an employee's own serious health condition. And then you've got the military exigencies as well, and then the 26 work weeks of military caregiver leave during a 12-month period. I'm not really going to talk a lot about the military 26 work weeks. What I'm trying to do, because time is limited, is address just kind of the most common scenarios. And honestly, that does not seem to come up very frequently, but certainly if you have a specific need about military caregiver leave, by all means, call me. My contact info is at the end of the presentation. So feel free to call me. And if we can, I'm happy to talk that through with you and provide you more information. So, how does FMLA benefit the employee? By providing job protected leave, by protecting their health insurance, and by requiring the employer to return the employee to the same or the equivalent job. All right, now, I thought you would find it interesting and useful, since sometimes these things do come up, from time to time. Some features of the FMLA that are easy to misunderstand. All right, FMLA is unpaid unless it's paid. So that can be confusing in itself. The actual legislation does not require the leave to be paid. However, you as the employer can establish a policy whereby you can either allow or require employees to use their paid leave to run concurrently with their FMLA. So that means, obviously, that if somebody has accrued sick leave, if somebody has accrued PTO or vacation leave, then you can tell that employee you have to use that leave while you're on FMLA. Or you can say, no, it's unpaid, and then you leave their vacation and sick leave out there to use later. I think for most employers, it probably works out well, and frankly, for the most part, the employee as well, to have those things run concurrently, because otherwise, you could be in a situation where an employee is out for 12 weeks, and then 8 weeks later, they say, oh, well, now I want to use 3 weeks of vacation. And it's not that I want to be harsh toward employees, but you do have to, just kind of keep in mind how these things work. And when you establish a policy, what is the outcome of that policy going to be? This policy, it should be in writing. It's very important to be consistent in applying your policy from employee to employee. So if you require one employee to use their paid leave, then you're going to require, or you're probably going to want to require all employees on FMLA to use their paid leave. And that also includes short-term disability leave that they can apply for while they're on FMLA if it's their own health condition, generally speaking. Now, Virginia has recently implemented, actually now, I guess it's been a year and a half ago, an insurance product that works with short-term disability that's called Virginia Paid Family Leave Insurance. And that will provide a paid leave benefit for up to 12 weeks. And if you want to know more about that, your broker can tell you more about that, since it is an insurance policy. But that is something new, because, FMLA is a federal law. That means that it applies to all 50 states, and it is unpaid. And what that means as a practical matter is that a lot of states, and we're going to talk about this in a little while, have gone out and passed their own state paid family medical leave laws. And these can cause a lot of confusion with FMLA. Virginia did not institute a mandatory paid family leave law, but instead they came up with this voluntary paid family and medical leave. So don't be confused by that. So that's Virginia's. And right now, neither North Carolina nor South Carolina has paid, in case we've got somebody on here. North Carolina and South Carolina do not have paid family medical leave right now. All right, now here's another question that maybe some people don't think about, but in my former life as an HR director, I butted up against this issue a couple of times until I became better informed about how the world works when you're talking FMLA. Now, you might be inclined, and I've heard people say, because I've actually had them say it to me, well, how do I do their PTO? Do we let their PTO run first and then we put them on FMLA? How does that work? So the answer to that is no. As soon as you know that an employee has an FMLA situation, you're going to go ahead and put that person on FMLA. You're not going to delay it. You're not going to wait until after they've exhausted their accrued leave. But if you have the policy that says they will use it concurrent with FMLA, you go ahead and put them on the protected leave, and then you tell them that they will be required to use their paid leave. So don't delay putting people on FMLA. Sometimes you're going to be on the fence and you're going to say, I wonder if this will qualify for FMLA. In that circumstance, you may, let's say, require a doctor's certification. And while you're waiting on that, just my thought is be open and forthright with the employee and just say, okay, I'm not sure if this is going to be FMLA or not. If it is, a qualified situation, then what we will do is we will backdate your FMLA to the first day that you were absent if it turns out that it is a legitimate FMLA absence. So communication, it's so important. Communication and common sense. And then again, note that you have the right to establish the policy that requires the paid leave use during FMLA and applying it consistently. All right, then we have the good old poster requirement. You know that everything has a poster requirement. I've noticed over the years how much more real estate the posters take up on the break room wall where most people post them, because we have posters for everything. So this little poster in the corner is what the FMLA poster looks like. And it actually functions as a tool that really you can use it as the basis for your communications to the employees. Now, here's some little known facts about the poster. You are required to display and keep the poster displayed to all applicants and all employees. And you're thinking to yourself, wow, how do we put it in such a way that applicants can see it? Let's see. FMLA was put into practice in 1993, and I don't think they ever anticipated having people, applying and interviewing exclusively online. So my feeling about that would be, it's kind of like you can't over communicate FMLA. You might put it on your physical bulletin board in your break room. You might put it on your website if you have like a careers page and could post it on your careers page, and that way everybody who goes on there could see it. If you have an intranet where employees log in to see information, you can put it on your intranet. You could send it to employees on once a year. You could send the poster out to them. So there are a lot of ways that you can communicate that poster, but it is supposed to be displayed for both employees and applicants. And you could be in a situation where you are an FMLA employer, but you don't have any eligible employees at specific locations. You still need to put the poster in that location, even if you don't have anybody that's eligible. Remember the 50 employees within 75-mile rule. If you have some office that only has 5 people in it, somewhere 75 or more miles away from the other people, then you're still going to need to put a poster there if you're an FMLA covered employer. So maybe that clears up questions about how do we do our posters. All right, now there's something called a general notice requirement. All right, so in addition to the poster, if a covered employer has any FMLA eligible employees, it also has to provide each employee with a general notice about the FMLA in the employer's handbook or some other written materials about leave and benefits. If you don't have a handbook or if you don't have any written materials, then you need to distribute this general notice to every new employee. So if you have a new employee package that you put together, stick the FMLA poster in there, okay? And again, like I say, it's kind of like you can't over communicate this stuff. Nobody's going to step in and say, hey, you're telling people too much about the FMLA, because there's no such thing. Now we get into something, and again, I said that we're going to talk about state laws in a few minutes, but the FMLA has a definition of family member. So, in order to take FMLA leave, you dealing with serious health conditions, obviously the employee can take FMLA for their own serious health condition, but also for the serious health condition of family members. Now, FMLA defines a family member, and honestly, this has come to be a fairly narrow definition of family members: a parent, a son or a daughter, or a spouse. So what that means is no in-laws, no grandparents. Yeah, so it's pretty limited. Now, there's also this thing called in loco parentis. So occasionally that may expand the definition of family member. Let's say you had a situation where you were raised by your aunt or uncle or your grandparent, then you could potentially utilize FMLA for the serious health condition of one of those people. And this does come into conflict with some of the state laws, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. And I have had many times employers ask me about, I have somebody who's asking for their in-laws. And that brings up a point that's important in that, as an employer, you can be more generous than the law requires. Okay, so you could say we will include in-laws in that, or we will include grandparents in that definition. But just remember the consistency issue, that if you have that as a policy, it should be in writing and it should apply to everybody. You don't pick and choose who you allow to utilize that benefit. All right. So next we're going to talk about some kind of nuts and bolts about administering FMLA. And I have this lovely little roadmap that I really like. Hopefully you can see this on your computer screen. It's really hard when you print out 2 or 3 slides to the page. You can't see it very well. But this comes right out of that Department of Labor employer guide to the FMLA. And I really like this because if you just kind of want a snapshot of how the world works with FMLA, obviously you start with sign number 1, and that is if you're a covered employer. And if that answer to that is yes, then you move on over to number 2, where you have to display your poster and your general notice. Then swing on around to number 3, and you have an employee who asks for FMLA. Now, determine if the employee is eligible. So the first thing you do is you go down that little list. They work for a covered employer. Have they worked for 12 months in the past 7 years? Did they work 1,250 hours in the past 12 consecutive months? And do they have a situation where that's FMLA eligible? And if you check those boxes, then you move on to the eligibility rights and responsibilities notice, and you give that notice to the employee. Now, online, you will find the Department of Labor forms that they have created, just to make sure you understand that you do not have to use those FMLA forms. They're really handy because they include everything you ever wanted to know about eligibility, rights and responsibilities, designation notices, and that sort of thing. So if you use their forms, you're not leaving anything out, which can be really helpful. But you don't have to. You can create your own forms. So you provide the employee with the form that says, yes, you're eligible for X weeks, or no, you're not because of this reason. All right, then you go on around to the certification process. Now, there may be circumstances under which you're going to want a doctor's certification of the need for FMLA leave. There may be circumstances when you don't want that, and honestly, it is not required. I think you need to consider the kind of the work that goes into getting the doctor's certification. And maybe, I know some employers might have a more broad or liberal definition of when they want a certification, but critical. You have to be consistent, okay? So if somebody's going to have back surgery, one person that's been with you for a long time, and you trust that person implicitly. Another person who might be a little newer, similar back surgery, you're not sure that they've been the greatest employee. Well, what you do for one, you do for all. So think about who you're going to require and under what conditions will you require a certification. All right, so you can see on your little roadmap that if you need that certification, you go on around that curve to item 6, and there's a form, of course. And if you don't do the certification, then you take that little shortcut through item number 7. My apologies for that. I just dropped my water and it went everywhere, of course. So item number 7 is determine if the leave request is for a qualifying reason. And then item number 8 is grant or deny the leave request, and then give them a designation notice that says, yes, we're going to designate this absence as FMLA and how much time we're going to designate to your FMLA leave. And then, of course, number 9, maintain your health benefits. Number 10, restore the employee. And then number 11, I can't stress enough, is maintain proper records for all FMLA absences. And again, I would highly recommend that you keep contemporaneous notes and keep those in a protected health information file or a secured file like that. So only employees with a need to know access can access the FMLA information of any particular employee. All right, so really we've talked a lot about these next slides, and some of this stuff is going to be for your information to use later. But a couple of important things about employees seeking to use FMLA. Where they can, they should give you 30 days advance notice of the need to take the FMLA. So for example, you have a pregnant employee, that's kind of a no-brainer. If they can give you a form sometime in advance of the due date that says approximately when they're due, and you know that this means that could change, right? When are babies born on their due dates? Probably not terribly often. If it's not foreseeable for more than 30 days, then the employee should provide you with notice as soon as it's practicable. And generally, it may be the same day, it may be the next business day, because sometimes people just don't know what they're going to need or what their family member is going to need. If it's not foreseeable at all, then they need to provide you notice as soon as the facts and the circumstances dictate. Like if the employee was in an accident and is in the hospital and they're not there today, you're wondering, where is this person? This is another one of those situations where you're not going to jump to job abandonment. You're going to want to find out what's happening. And, by that time, there may be a rumor out there that somebody says, oh, did you hear about Trisha's accident? And she's not here. And well, that then should make you start asking some questions and asking yourself, could this turn into an FMLA situation? All right. So generally speaking, it is okay to expect employees to use your usual and customary notice for the need of leave. Now, employees do need to provide enough information for an employer to reasonably determine if FMLA might apply to their situation. And sometimes it's hard to know if we're talking an FMLA situation. So, an example might be you hear an employee say to a coworker, she says, oh my gosh, my daughter's asthma has been acting up and my husband's taking her to the pediatrician again today, and I don't know what this means. We may have to take her for tests. Well, as the HR person, there should be a little signal that goes off in your brain that says, this could be a serious health condition for a family member. I need to inquire of this employee. I need to give her the poster and say, I understand your daughter's having a problem with asthma. If you fit this criteria, you actually may want to take FMLA, or you may be eligible for FMLA. So, it is ultimately up to the employer to put the employee on FMLA. And this next slide goes into what happens when you can't specifically request it. I know that I heard of a legal case where an employee, I think, had an accident and was in a coma in the hospital. And so the son called the employer to report his mother's absence at her hospitalization. Well, the employer didn't want to talk to the son. They said, no, our policy is the employee has to call in. They can't have somebody call in for them. Well, that's not smart on the part of the employer. All right, so you need to do an investigation there and make, confirm what the person is telling you, and then know that an inpatient hospitalization, that's almost always going to indicate a serious health condition. So be somewhat flexible if you're ever in a situation like that. Okay. Now, the employer, what do they have to do getting back to the employee when the employee has made an FMLA request? Within 5 business days, you've got to get that ball rolling and start, saying, yes, you're qualified, no, you're not, and that sort of thing. And if the employee is qualified, then you have to inform the employee of their FMLA rights and responsibilities and whether they need to provide medical certification. And you can use the rights and responsibilities notice. It's form WH-381. It can be used, that single form can be used for both of those, the rights and responsibilities and the rights and responsibilities and the designation notice. All right, so the employer then has to inform the employee whether the FMLA request is approved and what portion of the requested leave is designated and counted against the employee's FMLA entitlement. Okay, so again, these are optional forms. You do not have to use those. You can make up your own, but those are safe forms to use because you're complying with what the DOL requires. All right, we get questions from time to time on medical certifications, and we're going to talk in detail about medical certifications. You may require the employee to submit a certification form from a healthcare provider to support the need for FMLA to either care for a covered family member with a serious health condition or for the employee's own serious health condition. In the case of an employee who is taking off FMLA time to bond with a newborn or a child placed for adoption or foster care, you may not require any type of health certification, because if you think about it, both parents are eligible to take FMLA for bonding time for a newborn. So there is no health issue with the bonding time. So obviously the new dad can't be responsible for getting a medical certification for that. Now, a healthcare provider, what's that definition? Does not have to be an MD, but it may be an MD, maybe a podiatrist, a dentist, a midwife, nurse practitioner, or any one of a fairly long list of medical practitioners. And again, the FMLA does not require the use of any specific certification form. So, I always use the DOL forms, but you're not required to do that. You can come up with your own. All right, and then you need to grant or deny the request. Use that designation notice. Make certain that you let the employee know in writing what's happening to their request. If you're going to need medical certification, and obviously there are some deadlines attached to that medical certification. You have to allow 15 calendar days for the return of the document. So you tell the employee you need it. You put a little notification on your calendar for 15 calendar days, and then follow up with the employee. Hopefully by then they've got the medical certification. But you inquire, where is it if they haven't given it to you? Sometimes it can be hard because they're relying on their doctor to do this. And I'm sure that most doctors' favorite thing to do is to fill out these FMLA forms. So this is another one of the situations where you don't want to be punitive if the employee can't get it to you on precisely day 15. You can't let it slide but so long, but you do want to allow a little bit of wiggle room. The process can take time, and the employer may not formally designate the leave as approved under the FMLA until several weeks after it starts. And in some circumstances, you're going to still track the FMLA and backdate it to the start of the leave. So just remember that to tell that employee from the beginning that we may go back in time to the start of your absence once you've given me that medical certification. All right, so then next on your obligation list is to maintain the health benefits, which and to restore the employee to the same or an equivalent job. And remember that you as the employer have to continue paying the employer portion, and then the employee needs to pay the employee portion. And I'm going to go into some more detail on that in a few minutes. But those are the two big things you have to do once you've gotten all your paperwork and your approvals and all that sort of thing taken care of. Now, final thing here is document. Make sure you keep copies of every form that you filled out related to an employee's FMLA. Make sure that you, if you keep handwritten notes, that you jot down information in a readable form about decisions, requests, anything else you've communicated with the employee during this process. And then cannot ever underestimate or understate the communications piece of this. Clearly explaining to the employee all the information. And again, this is my opinion. This is not anything that's required by the Department of Labor, but I always like to tell employees, how are they going to get paid while they're out? How are their benefits going to be treated while they're out? How much they will need to pay, like if they use up all their paid leave while they're using paid leave, you can just take their part of the premium out of their pay just like normal. If they get into an unpaid situation, then you need to communicate to them how to pay their insurance premium. Make certain they know as soon as possible how much they need to pay, how often they need to pay, what means do they need to pay? Like, can they mail you a check on the 15th and the last day of every month to keep their insurance rolling and that sort of thing? And I would follow that up, honestly, with an email. I just can't communicate too much with employees to make certain they understand everything. Make sure that the employee walks away knowing who to get in touch with and the means. Should they call you? Should they email you? If they have any questions, make certain that you are available and that they know they've got somebody they can call if they have any questions. Now, general FMLA communications. And again, this is my preference and my thought on how to treat employees on FMLA. Make certain that the employee on FMLA continues to receive important communications. Remember, they're still an employee. They still need to know stuff. Like, I don't know, if you have a newsletter, if you have emails about some policy change or procedure change, go ahead and send that, even though they may not be checking their work email. Go ahead and send it to their work email, and when they get back, they'll have all this stuff that they can catch up on. Now, things like open enrollment materials, they need to get that. So it's helpful to have, a personal email address, or you can do it by mail. You can mail them the package and that sort of thing, but they still need to, be in the loop as far as all that information goes. I would say do acts of kindness like cards or flowers. Now, make sure that you clear with the employee before you share any information about their FMLA situation. Okay, some employees might not want everybody to know that they're having surgery. I mean, obviously they're going to notice that they're absent, but I've had employees that were extremely private and simply did not want any info shared. So, make certain that you get employee clearance before you release that information. And then occasionally while they're out, check in with the employee, offer help. Do you have any questions? Everything going okay? Confirm, does it look like your timetable is still valid? Hope you're doing well. And does it still look like you're going to be back on March 25th or whatever? There's no problem with checking in, but let the employee know that you're going to be checking in or that you'd like to check in, and even ask them when they're getting ready to go out, what is their preferred method? Would you prefer texts to phone calls? I mean, I can tell you when I was a new mom, I didn't want anybody calling me on the phone. Those calls were not appreciated. And even though that was way before the email days, I said, maybe I'll call and check in with you, or I'll let you know when it's okay to call me. Some don'ts. Don't expect employees on FMLA to do any real work while they're out. Okay, let them have their time off. Do not infringe. on their FMLA. It's a right that they have, and they have the right not to be bothered with work-related stuff while they're out. Now, what do you do if you have an occasional question? Generally speaking, it's probably okay to text them and say, hey, I'm sorry, where do you keep the key to the file cabinet? But again, when the employee goes out and you're giving them this little list of things and communications, you might just add that to it and say, hey, if we have a question, just a periodic question, we'd like to be able to call you or text you if that's okay. And then just make sure you get permission to do that. Do not ever pressure the employee to return or induce guilt. And this is something you need to pass on to your supervisors. When that employee gets back from FMLA, to have a supervisor give them the cold shoulder because they were out. They really ticked off because everybody had to work harder. That is not good form for HR or supervisors or even regular employees to do that. Again, it's a legal right, and certain actions like that could be perceived as retaliatory. And so you don't ever want to retaliate against anybody who's requested or taken or returned from FMLA. And this leads right into point 3, which is don't punish or otherwise take negative action against an employee who is on FMLA or who has recently come back. That is just not appropriate, and it can be heartbreak for you. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit more detail about medical certifications. Kind of a question and answer thing that maybe you've had some questions about this. Can an employer require proof of a serious health condition? And the answer to that is yes. You can request that certification of a health provider for your own serious health condition or for your family members, okay? But again, the 15-day rule applies where you give them 15 days to respond. If you find that the certification is incomplete, write down, send in writing how it's deficient, and give the employee a new deadline to get it back to you, which should be 7 days, 7 calendar days to cure that deficiency. Unless that's just not practicable, it's kind of a play it by ear kind of thing. But keep in mind that that 7 days is specified in the FMLA legislation. And so that might make your job a little bit harder, but again, inform the employee that if this turns out to be a legit FMLA need, then you will backdate their request back to the original date that this whole process started. Can the employer require a second opinion? And the answer to that is yes. An employer may require a second or third opinion at the employer's expense if the employer has reason to doubt the validity of the medical certification. And yes, I have actually heard of this happening, where an employee has presented something that looks like a mock-up of a medical provider's stationery or something like that. Corbin is expressing disbelief. But yes, and and I apologize if anyone out there works for physicians, but you know how notoriously bad physician handwriting is. So it was no problem putting a signature on there that they thought no one would question. So anyway, yes, second and third opinions are okay. Can an employer require the employee to give the medical records over to the employer? No, absolutely not. An employee is never required to give the employer his or her medical records. You can request that the employee require medical certification, but you cannot ask the employee to give you their medical records, which kind of shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody. Now, this question is not phrased exactly right. When does an employer have to request a medical certification? This is if you're going to require it, in most cases, at the time the employee gives notice for the leave or within 5 business days. And again, if the leave is unforeseen, the employer should request medical certification within 5 days after the leave begins. An employer may request certification at a later date if he or she has reason to question the appropriateness or the duration of the leave. Okay, so you have an employee that comes to you and says, I need to have my tonsils out, and I'm going to have surgery on X date. And so I need to be out for a week. So the employee, you say, well, right now, you know what? I know this person has been having frequent problems with their tonsils. They've been sick a lot and taking antibiotics, and I know that about them. So I'm not going to require medical certification right now because it's only 5 days. All right, so on Monday, the employee is due back at work and they call in and say, the doctor says I need to be out for another month. Okay, that could trigger a reason to say, I need your doctor to medically, do medical certification for that extra month. So just be aware of that, that yes, you can. You have to use common sense in all of these situations, but I could see that being a trigger, even though you didn't originally request it. And that's something that you could tell the employee in advance, that right now we're not going to require medical certification, but if your leave has to be extended, we may require that. All right, can the employer contact the healthcare provider about an employee's serious health condition? This is probably not something that most employers would think to do, but the answer is that the healthcare provider has to comply with HIPAA privacy regulations, okay? So yeah, the employer can contact the employee's healthcare provider, but that's going to be primarily to authenticate or clarify the certification. If you have questions about, I can't read this, what does it mean? Or to ask the provider, we are kind of suspicious about this certification, and I'm sorry to take your time, but can you just confirm that you completed a certification form for this employee? So yeah, in that case, you can have someone in your HR department or the leave administrator, something like that, contact the doctor. Now, this may come as a surprise, but in no case can the employee's direct supervisor contact the healthcare provider, okay? So you've got to have a degree of separation between the employee and their direct supervisor. So it's got to be HR or somebody outside of that direct chain of command. So the employee, in order to have the healthcare provider to give more information about the health condition, the employee is going to need to provide the healthcare provider with written authorization to disclose specific information to the employer. Now, believe it or not, as the employer, you are not entitled to a diagnosis, okay? The employee does not have to tell you what's wrong with them. The doctor does not have to specify a diagnosis. The doctor on the certification form simply saying, this employee has a serious health condition and needs to be out for X number of days. They may say something like, we'll do a follow-up after 30 days or something like that. But that's it. You can't call and ask for more specifics about what's wrong, or you should not do that. And in many cases, you can't do that. So that's not safe territory. That's not a safe path to go down. All right, what about ongoing health conditions? Health conditions take many forms, serious health conditions do. All right, so if the original certification is for more than 30 days, then the employer usually has to wait until after that minimum time frame has run before they ask for any kind of recertification. All right, so what that means is that employee with the back surgery says, here's my health certificate from my doctor. It's going to take me 6 weeks. I'm going to be out for 6 weeks. The employer knows it's going to be for more than 30 days and cannot ask for any further certifications. All right, now suppose in the beginning of week 6, they haven't been out their full 6 weeks yet, but the Monday of their 6 week, the employee calls you and says, I am not healing as well as I thought. My doctor says I need another month off. All right, at that point, you can tell them, please have the doctor recertify that you need that other month off. Okay, So under those circumstances, yes, you can. Even though if you had originally asked for the 8 weeks off or 10 weeks off, the employer wouldn't be able to ask for further medical certification. So anyway, some nuances of this are interesting. All right, now, in all cases, the employer is allowed to request a recertification every 6 months. Now, employer, you may be saying, well, wait a minute, I thought they only got 12 weeks. Employees can use intermittent leave for FMLA under certain circumstances. And so you could have somebody who's being treated, let's say they're having chemotherapy, or let's say you have a migraine sufferer who periodically has migraines, and this has been a lifelong condition, and you know that they just may be out. You can still, every 6 months, you can require recertification if they're on indefinite leave or if they're going to be out more than 6 months. So then we've got that reiteration of that extension of FMLA. The employer may ask the employee to recertify in fewer than 30 days if the employee requests an extension of their leave. All right. Now we're getting again into some dangerous paths with lots of potholes. What happens if the employee fails to timely submit a properly requested medical certification? Now, there may be an explanation for the delay. An employee is in the hospital. They have to have emergency surgery. They are not in any condition right now to get that form filled out. They can see if a family member can talk to the doctor. That could be a sufficient explanation. But FMLA protection for leave may be delayed or denied if you can see that somebody is scamming you, or you strongly suspect that somebody's taking advantage. And if the employer never provides a medical certification, then the leave is not FMLA leave. And so, employer, you would ask yourself, well, what does that mean? They're not here, they're absent. What do I do? Well, you may have to take some stronger measures with that employee. And now you're on the path that says, I probably need to talk to a lawyer before I take punitive action against this person. Okay. Same with the fitness for duty certification. If you don't get that back from an employee when you've requested one, then you may delay restoring the job until the employee provides the certification. And if the employee never provides the certification, then you can deny the reinstatement. And again, what does that mean? Well, it means you're not going to bring them back to work, which means that they may no longer be an employee of yours. Again, don't do any of this, in my opinion, without talking to a lawyer, because now all FMLA is fraught with pitfalls as far as taking negative actions against employees. So there are definitely times when you want that lawyer's input. Now, can you require an employee to sign a medical release as part of the medical certification? No. This gets into, again, with a medical release, kind of gives you wide open access to people's medical files. And no, you cannot request any type of release like that just to turn over medical information. All right, I've got some, hope you're hanging with me. I know this is long, as it always is, but FMLA is not, let's just say FMLA is something that many employers encounter on a regular basis, and sometimes it gets easier, but a lot of times it doesn't, because oftentimes these requests are unique. All right, so the first one is a lot of fun. Let's say the 4 different ways of determining the 12-month period. You know that employees get 12 weeks, or in the case of the military situation, 26 weeks in a 12-month period. How do you figure that? All right. Number 1, you can do a calendar year. So every January 1st, you can start your 12-month period over for everybody. Or you don't have to do a 12-month period that starts January 1st. You could pick any 12-month date and say, okay, every July the 1st, our 12-month period starts over for everybody. Now, what happens with that situation is if that's your 12-month period, there's a thing that's called leave stacking. So what that would mean is you have an employee who's out on FMLA. Let's just say you have a 12-month calendar. Your employee is out on FMLA in November and December of 2023. Your calendar turns over on January 1. That means that they can also take January, February, and March of 2024. Now, again, this is given they have a bona fide serious health condition. So just keep that in mind, all right? And maybe that's not an issue. It doesn't have to be an issue. Same with any fixed 12-month period. You're always going to have the potential for leave stacking. All right, so then you can do the 12-month period measured forward from the date an employee takes FMLA leave, all right? So the next 12-month period begins the first time leave is taken after the completion of the prior 12-month period. That means that everybody has the potential to be on their own 12-month period, just depending on if or when they've used FMLA. Then the fourth method is a rolling 12-month period measured backward from the date an employee uses any FMLA leave. This is the one means of calculating it that does not set you up for leave stacking. Now, the disadvantage of this is every employee is on their own timetable based on when they started. And honestly, I know we like to do things digitally, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who can figure out how to do this digitally. I always did this manually. I just copied a 12-month calendar that was on a single page. And if I had an employee that was going to go on an FMLA, I would physically take a pen and circle all the days they're going to be out, and then just keep that in their file so that if beginning on that first day when they were out, 12 months, calculate, right? And if they still want more time off during that same 12-month period, then I use that same calendar and circle all these new dates that they're going to be out. All right, so a little bit more complicated, but it prevents leave stacking. And honestly, how many employees are you going to have out in any one year? Now, maybe a larger employer is going to have multiple employees out, but I just found that was the easiest way to keep up with it without worrying about the leave stacking. Now, if you change your method, and you can, then I might have some people out there right now that are going, I never thought about that calendar year problem. I think I want to change to that number 4, rolling 12-month period. You're perfectly welcome to do that. But 2 things to keep in mind. First of all, you want to give people 60 days written notice. Actually, that's required. 60 days written notice that you're going to change the method. And in addition to that, if you know right now that you've got an employee or 2 that's going to need FMLA after you make that change, and if that works to their disadvantage, then you need to let them use whichever method, the old or the new, works to the greater advantage of the employee. Okay, so you can't force them to adapt to the new one if that one is not going to be as beneficial as the old way. So I hope that makes sense. The big deal about not disadvantaging people by making some type of change like that. And again, this is one of those times when you're not going to look at that and go, oh, you know what? Maybe that employee would quit if we change our method and they don't get as much time as they thought they were going to have. No, don't do that, because that's probably retaliatory. All right. Now, here's another interesting kind of surprise out of the box question that you may not be aware of the answer. What happens if an employee becomes eligible for FMLA while they're out on non-FMLA? So let's say you've got somebody who hasn't worked for you for the 12 months. They go out and take, they have surgery that's non-FMLA, and you hold their job for 3 weeks while they have their tonsils out. This person's sicker than that other tonsils person. All right, so they take their 3 weeks off. Well, guess what? In week 3, now they've hit their 12 months and now they're eligible for FMLA. And now they have complications from their surgery. And the doctor says, whoa, I'm not sure how long this person's going to have to be out. We're going to have to go in there and do some major work. It could be 6 or 8 weeks, or it could be 12 weeks. Well, that employee is now eligible for the full 12 weeks of FMLA, which means that employee could potentially have 15 weeks of FMLA, which is surprising. So that means that you have an employee who's been there a shorter time than anyone else, and yet they could potentially be getting more time off. But that's the way it works, because you cannot count that FMLA, that pre-FMLA time off against their FMLA allotment. So that's something that tends to surprise people when they hear that. All right. Now, what happens if the employee doesn't pay their health insurance premium? Well, while the employee is on FMLA, you know they're supposed to pay it. You actually can cancel their health insurance under these very specific rules. You set up the payment schedule, you communicate the payment schedule, and the employee does not adhere to that. All right. If the employee is 30 days late, you have to give them a 30-day grace period. You can give them 15 days written notice and say, if you do not pay the premiums due by this date, then we will cancel your health insurance. All right, so you can cancel it. And you must, they must be reinstated, however, if they want to be reinstated, as soon as they come back to work, and you cannot enforce a waiting period or any type of qualification or anything like that. So do be aware that you don't have to keep their insurance in place. Some employees actually voluntarily cancel while they're on FMLA. I don't know why. Maybe some people sometimes switch over to their their spouse's plan or something. But FMLA just seems an odd time to be without your health insurance. All right, now we've talked about this a little bit. What if an employee does not notify us that they need FMLA? And again, we go back to that situation that, yes, they should do it and they should give you the 30 days notice, but under no circumstances does the employee need to use the words Family and Medical Leave Act, nor do they have to simply say, I need FMLA. Hard to believe, but you may have some employees out there who, despite the fact that you've got the poster everywhere and that it's in your employee handbook, they've missed this. So they don't specifically have to ask, but they do have to give you enough information so that you are aware that, hey, this leave may be covered by FMLA. So if you're getting clues that there's some type of FMLA situation happening in this employee's life, it is up to you, the employer, to explore it with the employee and say, hey, do you have a situation where this could possibly be FMLA, rather than, again, just taking some type of action or just letting the employee go out and not getting paperwork signed and all that kind of stuff. All right, now here's a big trick question. Can an employee on FMLA be terminated? Well, the answer to that is actually yes, but I'm going to jump right down to the bottom of that slide and say terminating an employee who is on FMLA is always risky, and we strongly recommend that you seek legal advice before doing so. Little known feature of FMLA, though, is this. An employee on FMLA does not have a greater right to a job with your company than someone who is not on FMLA. So, first example, you can terminate an employee for cause while they're out. And I'm just going to use this as an example. And again, I'm not going to tell you that this would be an absolute slam dunk. Always seek attorney's advice before you fire somebody on FMLA. But you discover while they're out that they've been embezzling money from you. What then? Well, your employment lawyer and you ask their advice on how to handle this situation. But terminating them could be an option. All right. An employee on FMLA who is part of a reduction in force. Let's say you are merging two departments and you're going to end up laying off 10 people, and one of the positions that this employee that is on FMLA occupied one of those positions. Can you RIF that person? Well, maybe, but talk to your employment lawyer. What about somebody who has exhausted FMLA but who's not able to return to work? Well, there are circumstances under which you could terminate that person. For example, if the person is out for a family member's health condition that is not military, situation, you don't have to hold a job open in that circumstance. You as the employer can decide what you want to do. We talk with our clients on a regular basis, and I have found that many times employers want to work with people as much as possible. And so a lot of the employers that we work with, I think, would err on the side of saying, wow, that's a terrible situation to be in. Your mother's dying or something like that. We're not going to fire this person. We're going to let them stay out another 2 weeks. And that is awesome to do that. Do keep in mind that you may be establishing a precedent, but my opinion, it's not a reason not to do it. Just remember it. Remember that, every action has consequences. Now, if it's for the employee's own serious health condition, you have to be cautious there because the Americans with Disabilities Act could apply in this situation. So you have an employee that's been out, like, let's just say you have an employee, a new mom, who has been having some pretty serious health problems since she gave birth to her child and is under the care of a doctor. She's been hospitalized a couple of times, and she calls you and says, I think I need to be out another month, and my doctor agrees with me. And I'm making a request for a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. I think that it's reasonable to let me have another month off. In which case, as a smart employer, you would say, I'm sending you this medical certification forms, please have those filled out. You get that back, and you let that person, as a reasonable accommodation, you let her stay out another month. The weird thing about when policy is made through court cases, strange things can happen. There is no outer limit to what's reasonable. So if the employee wants a month, if they want 2 months, if they want 6 months, it could possibly be construed as a reasonable accommodation to let people have off that time. And that would be another situation where I would urge you to contact your employment lawyer if it does run into some lengthy time off, just to find out, what can I do about this? We've been limping along without the person. We really need to replace her. But I would not just tell the employee, no, that's not reasonable. You either come back or we're going to fire you and replace you. Okay, so those are the circumstances under which I would definitely seek legal advice. All right, now remember, just as a little refresher, how can an employee make use of FMLA? You've got continuous blocks of time, which are probably the easiest ones to deal with. You've got periodic blocks of time, and that's usually called intermittent leave. Like, I need to have physical therapy for the next 8 weeks. I need to leave at noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays to go for my physical therapy. That would be intermittent use of FMLA. Then you could have a situation where the employee does a schedule reduction. So your regular daily or weekly working hours are reduced. And oddly enough, that's called reduced schedule leave. So here is an example of a practical reduced schedule leave that several times we used with a former employer of mine. When new mom is coming back from having a baby, we agreed to this arrangement. For the first 8 weeks, she's out full time. And then for the final 4 weeks, she says, you know what, could I work half days for 8 weeks and ease my way back into work? And we allowed that. We said, yeah, that'll work just fine. And so you could do something like that, okay, just to reduce scheduled leave. So there are all kinds of configurations, as long as you're fair about it, and as that just common sense in all things. And so that's your 3 ways that employees can use their reduced scheduled leave. All right, so the final section, I believe, is to talk for just a few minutes about individual state leave laws. For many of you, this is not going to apply, but for some of you, it could apply in an unexpected way. All right, so it's getting complicated. As of January of 2024, believe it or not, 22 states have or will soon have some sort of paid leave for employees. In most states having such leave, it's mandatory for employers to participate. In Virginia, it's voluntary, okay? And then it's not just states that are passing these leave laws, but it's also cities. So for example, 8 cities in California, the city of Chicago, cities in Maryland, New York, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and New Mexico, all have their own paid leave laws. In most places that have leave requirements, what we're going to call FMLA benefits are funded by payroll taxes, and those may be payroll taxes that come out of the employer's pocket or the employee's pocket or both. In some cases, it's funded by a mandatory employer-provided insurance policy, and that's New York specifically right now. Then again, our voluntary program is funded by short-term disability insurance. Okay, so when do you need to know about state leave laws? Well, obviously, if you're a multi-state employer, so that means that you have offices in multiple states. You should go down this list and see, or you can see this nice little colorful map, who's got state paid leave laws, because you may be in a state that has paid leave laws. Or, now here's the kicker for a lot of employers. If you have remote employees who work in a state that has its own paid family medical leave law, then you need to know as well. So for example, you've got an employee who works in Colorado. Colorado has this nice little arrangement called FMLA, F-A-M-L-I. I just love to say that because it's so cute. But it seems to be a great program. But if you've got employees in Colorado, you need to familiarize yourself with that law, because you may be subject to that. So it's not just multi-state employers, it's anyone who has remote employees. You need to be aware that all those states are out there. All right. And so that raises the question of, well, what about FMLA? Is that going to be phased out sometime? And so my answer to that is no, not anywhere anytime soon. This law has been with us for over 30 years, hasn't been changed much. And even though there is a push internationally for not just job protected leave, but paid leave, FMLA has not been changed to reflect that. So what's happened? The states have gone out on their own and started their own paid leave laws. So now we've got this hodgepodge of individual state and family medical leave laws in addition to FMLA. So yeah, FMLA is going to continue to be there, and you cannot ignore it, even in those states where you have state laws, you still need to pay attention to FMLA. Now, how do state laws differ from FMLA? I just did a quick recap here. All right, just the 12 weeks under FMLA, 12 weeks of job protected leave applies to employers with 50 or more employees for 20 or more weeks. FMLA allows job and insurance protected leave for certain family members for specific medical conditions, and it covers employees working for a covered employer under those criteria, the 12 months, the 1,250 hours, and the 75 miles, within 75 miles of 50 employees. So there are a lot of variations among the state family medical leave laws in all of these categories. And so the employer education is really important. So here's how in a snapshot the ways that these laws differ from each other. They are wide open on who's defined as a covered family member. Some states loop or include domestic partners in their covered family members. Some have grandparents, some have aunts and uncles, some have, sorry, I can't think of the exact language, but it's somebody who's functioned as a family member, whether or not they're blood related to you. So again, the state next door to some other state might have completely different rules. The waiting period for benefits eligibility, in the FMLA, you have those requirements before you're eligible for FMLA. Well, that doesn't apply in all states. What's the definition of wages? That can be different from state to state. And then you've got this thing called safety leaves, where some states provide their paid family medical leave, for example, in situations of domestic violence. You may be able, if you're a victim of domestic violence, you may be able to use this paid leave to take, let's say, 5 days off to find an apartment or something like that. Prenatal and pregnancy benefits are, I'm not going to say all over the place, but there are some nuances. For example, I believe at least one state applies prenatally. So before you even go out to have the baby, you can start using these benefits. The minimum increments for intermittent leave. States set their own requirements for, can you take it by the 15 minutes or do you have to take a whole day or a week? Believe it or not, post-termination availability of benefits. So if you're not even an employee anymore, in some states, you still have access to these benefits. And then your military exigencies can be different by state. So, like I say, educate yourself on, and we've got some resources we're going to put out there in just a minute. Now, what happens when FMLA and these state leave laws conflict? Well, the easiest rule of thumb to remember is which benefit is most generous? Well, that's going to be the law that prevails. So if you have employees in a different state that requires paid family medical leave, you're going to want to compare that leave to FMLA. And so, for example, if you have an employee, even though you're a Virginia company, you have an employee that lives in, let's say, California, and they want to take leave for a grandchild who has a serious health condition, well, in Virginia, you're not required to do that. Under FMLA, you're not required to do that. In California, you are required to do that. So that's the law that you follow. So they may get a greater benefit by living in a state that has these more generous leave laws. Yeah, and so I gave an example here of which law do you follow when you've got unpaid leave under FMLA, but you have required paid leave under a state law. Well, you're going to give them the pay instead of enforcing an unpaid situation. All right, how in the world can you keep up with all this? So here are some suggestions. First of all, I'm going to suggest that you join the Society for Human Resources Management, which is SHRM. And I recommend joining that. There is an annual membership fee, but in many cases, you also have a local SHRM affiliate that you can be part of, and whatever their situation is, do they have monthly luncheon meetings or that sort of thing? But one of the really nice things about SHRM is, number one, they're proactive. So they publish information on new stuff on a regular basis. Your inbox will get a lot of newsletters and a lot of stuff from SHRM just on a daily basis. But then they also are searchable. So if you have a question about one of the state leave laws, you can go right on there and search what is Colorado's paid leave law. Secondly, there are services out there, and we have one specifically called Zywave, Z-Y-W-A-V-E. Now, our clients are eligible to be part of Zywave on the client portal, and it is free for our clients. So you would need to let us know if you want to be enrolled in Zywave, and we can take care of that. Blogs, law firms are famous for doing blogs. We find out that I access blogs on a regular basis, And the downside of the blogs, of course, is going to be making sure that you're accessing the most up-to-date info. A lot of law firms also post stuff on their websites on a regular basis. And again, to make sure that you got the most up-to-date info is the downside of relying on websites. So, you know, internet searching, if state leave law applies to your company, if you don't use SHRM or you don't have Xyway, quick internet search should take you to links to that specific state. I've read a lot of information on a lot of the different states, and I can tell you that most of these websites are really good. They have both from the employee point of view and the employer point of view. So don't hesitate to jump on there and see what you can find. The additional is the link to the employer guide published by the DOL. Strongly recommend it. 75 pages long, which looks like, oh my gosh, how does anybody figure this out? It's extremely well laid out, a great table of contents right at the beginning, nice colorful illustrations and examples and all that sort of thing. So I can't recommend that enough. Yeah, and don't forget, Corbin and I do HR on Mic, and we would love to have you join us for that. We send out links to our latest broadcasts on a regular basis, and we try to cover timely topics, and we are absolutely interested in what you have to say about topics that you are interested in. We're doing some experiments on length. These are generally 15 minutes or less. We are working on maybe some shorter episodes that do quick takes on short topics. So please communicate with us if you have the desire at this website or at either Corbin's or my, I'm sorry, not website, email, or get in touch with either one of us. We're always happy to help. Now, do we have any questions out there? Let's see if I can do this without cutting us off. Anybody post a question to our question? It looks like, Corbin, does that look like we have a question out there?
Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, wait, I think we do. I'm just going to turn off the screen share just because other people.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So let's see what we've got. Sorry, it takes a village here.
Need to make it bigger. Oh, here we go.
All right. Let's see. Wow, we've got quite a few questions, it looks like. All right. Okay, good question. What if the company has was 50 plus, but not anymore? How do you basically no longer be an FMLA employer? And I think I might have a resource at hand. It is, if you, my apologies, I'm going to take a second here to, because I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction. All right, once an employer meets the requirement for FMLA, the employer is a covered employer and will remain covered as long as it employs 50 or more employees in 20 or more work weeks in either the current year or the previous calendar year. So if you drop below 50 in 2024, but you had 50 in 2023, then you would still be an FMLA employer for 2024. Okay, does that make sense for you?
Yeah.
Okay, but after that, if you're still below 50, then in 2025 you would no longer be an FMLA covered employer, and you would have to remember to take back all those posters and to change the language in your handbook and do all that stuff to get yourself out of the FMLA obligation. Just make sure you don't want to have anything out there that represents you as an FMLA employer if you're not. But until December 31st of 2024, you need to keep all that stuff in place to make sure you're still complying. All right, for FMLA, is continuation of health insurance the only protected coverage? And what about dental, vision, and life insurance coverage? Good question. Dental, vision, and group health are considered to be health insurance. Life insurance is not health insurance. Okay, so that is not covered under FMLA. I'm honestly not trying to think of what we do with, I believe that when someone is out on FMLA, they can continue to pay those life premiums through their payroll, and you can tell the employee, if you want it for the duration, continue to pay us this amount each month, but it's not required by FMLA like the other three are required. All right, if an employee requests FMLA months out for surgery or delivery, how do we caveat the approval should such things change? Yeah, that's a good question. I know that I actually dealt with this fairly recently. All right, you could go ahead and have the employee fill out their forms. I don't know how many months you're talking about. You know, like somebody comes to, you know how it is today, somebody announces when they see their pregnancy test, oh, I'm 8 days pregnant, I want to put in for FMLA. Yeah, I'd probably say let's wait until a little bit further on to do that. But anyway, so that let's say they want to do it 90 days in advance. I don't think there's anything really wrong with that, but have the conversation and then follow that up in writing that this is what we're anticipating, but if anything changes, then we're going to redo these forms when we get closer. But if nothing changes and the forms still seem to be good, then I don't think there's anything really dangerous about doing them in advance. But clearly, you're going to have the expectation that they could be changed if needed. All right. All right. Now, I am getting a question here about the Service Contract Act, and I will have to be honest with you. I don't know the answer to this question because I'm not well versed in the Service Contract Act. Is there a way that we could copy that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm consulting with Corbin here.
Yeah, so when we pull up the information, we can keep that. It'll show on the person that registered.
Okay, all right, great. Because what we'll do is we can look, I think we probably in Xywave,
yeah,
and see if we can find an answer to that in Xywave. So I apologize for that. Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have a, oh, I've been told that I have a discrepancy between, is it possible to
make this bigger?
Maybe not.
You help.
Oh, here we go.
Keep saying 15 or 7 business.
My apologies. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh,
I'm so used to working in business days. When you're talking about the certifications and that sort of thing, I am very sorry if I said something misleading. It is calendar days. Okay, if you're going to, the 15 days to return the medical certification. If you need more time to correct a deficiency, it's 7 calendar days. And I'm very sorry for defaulting to the business days. Okay, now let's see, can you do that? All right, if the doctor states the employee has a health condition and will be seen in 30 days, until then they are to be excused from all work. Do they need to state serious, since we never asked for a diagnosis? And I am happy you asked that question because just happened to come prepared with the definition of serious health condition. All right, serious health condition is an illness, injury, impairment, physical or mental condition that involves inpatient care in a hospital, hospice, or a residential medical care facility, or continuing treatment by a healthcare provider. So I would deem the employee, if they're going to have to go back and have further consultations with the doctor after 30 days, that would be continuing treatment by a healthcare provider. So I would call that a serious health condition. I would err on the side of calling that a serious health condition. All right. Can I see that? Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. What is that? No, I don't want to remove it.
Oh, there we go. As a division of a dental practice, is the 50 employees rule applied to each individual office? Probably not. If it's one corporation,
Right.
if it's owned by the same people, if it's controlled by the same people, they have management in common, I'm sorry, let me back up one step. If they're owned by the same people, then yes. They're owned by different people, but they have the same management, then yes. If they're owned by different people and they're under different management, then no. They would not all be, even though they may be called the same name, they are probably not going to fall under the rule because they have different management and possibly different ownership. Then they would not be considered part.
And so, Barbara, like under the ACA, you know, the applicable large employer status, it kind of follows the Section 414 rules. So, and that also applies to retirement plans, right? So if everybody is in the same plan and all of that, and it's sort of a corporation governing that, I would think it would extend to FMLA too. So they would be sort of considered one company versus different companies.
Yeah, and I would say this, that if you still have a question about that, why don't you email me or email Corbin, and we can get you a specific definition. But I think it's generally fairly straightforward. And it's funny because I tried to anticipate some questions that might come up, and that one, I don't think, no, I did not anticipate that one. So I'm not prepared to go deeper than common management, common ownership.
Right. And yes, we send out the slides.
Yes, the slides are going to come to you. I'm hopeful we can get those this week.
Yeah.
We have someone in charge of that, and she isn't here today, but I think
we'll be back. Record it, and everything we have is posted on our TowneBenefits.com under employer news and webinars.
Right.
And it's all available too.
Yes.
So if someone missed it today.
We want to make sure that you have access by any means you want. All right. And now, here's another good question. Wow, you guys are really asking great questions today. Is elective surgery protected under FMLA? The answer to that, I believe, is yes. And here's how I arrived at that. The rules say if you're under the care of a physician, ongoing care, and they do not differentiate between what kind of procedure you're having. So that would be the way I would rule it. The second thing is, because the employer is not entitled to a diagnosis, you may know that the person's having some type of elective surgery. And again, there are different forms of elective surgery. So you know, if you're going to have a facelift, or I'm trying to think of another example of people who have had some surgery performed to correct something that's not maybe not totally medically necessary, but that they would just like to take care of as a matter of comfort or appearance or something like that. Like, you know, let's just say you have some sort of disfigurement, and so you're going to have some surgery to have that fixed. Yeah, I would not exclude that as a reason for FMLA. I don't think that's safe. I'm pretty sure that has been deemed to be FMLA covered.
Okay, well, that's all the questions we had, and so
awesome.
Really great questions today. Would you like to close, Barbara?
Sure. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We always enjoy so much interacting with our clients. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us. If you have any further questions or for any type of feedback, let us know what you might like more HR on Mike episodes on that might be helpful to you, or anything like that. But until next time, we hope that you just enjoy life, and may your FMLA problems be few. But call us anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.